What makes a prequel movie good? Specifically, how can it best serve horror? Today, I wanted to chat about horror prequels, their achievements and failures, and try to figure out which one I would consider the best. So I started researching, as I'm doing a video on the best horror sequel and remake as well. And one of the first things I realized when planning all three topics is that the word best had to be split into two roads. There's the best horror prequel purely as a standalone experience, and then the best horror prequel as a prequel, something that respects the source material and maybe even enhances it. Horror prequels don't have a great reputation, and it's no wonder why there aren't that many of them. Apartment 7A tries to be a remake and a prequel at the same time, and does about as well as someone simultaneously trying to beat a juggling record and a drinking record. Hell House Origins not only adds little to the original concept, but the main character is about as likable as syphilis. Prometheus looks pretty, and at least explores some new ideas to the franchise, but serves as a perfect example of someone trying to write a script that sounds smart, instead of a smart person writing a good script. And speaking of smart, the characters are not. 2011's The Thing makes a good call by abandoning the suspense that it honestly can't muster and focusing on being a monster movie. However, you don't care about most of these people, and the mediocre CGI only reminds us of how good the practical effects were in the original. Also, not so fun fact, the prequel actually did utilize a lot of practical effects, but then the producers decided that they didn't want it to look too 80s and put terrible special effects on top of what they already had. Is that not the stupidest waste of resources you've ever heard?
What the hell is even that?
Still, there are some solid horror prequels out there. Annabelle Creation is actually creepy, and the main actress is so good, she made the adult actors look like amateurs. Red Dragon has a great cast and sets up Hannibal's prison sentence in an incredibly intense sequence. And Final Destination 5 is actually my least favorite in the series, but the way it establishes it being a prequel is genius. But let's get to the best. The best prequel as a prequel I'll mention later, but solely as a movie, I have to go with... This again, yes, again, with 2024's The First Omen. I've talked about this movie a lot on my channel, which tends to happen when something I had little hope of ends up knocking me on my ass. I almost wanted to put something else for sheer variety, but that's just dishonest. The First Omen is a beautiful, haunting movie to look at. The framing illuminates character isolation and growth. The lighting is the best I've seen in horror for some time. Not only is it easy on the eyes and fits the emotion of different scenes, but serves the overall goal of the film. And that goal is to immerse the viewer in a dream that slowly becomes a nightmare. You would think that most horror films do this, but they actually don't. Everything is either gothic all the time or flip between scary and normal back and forth. I'm not saying this as a criticism, but the First Omen's visuals were so refreshing because I felt this growing dread from the first frame. It's not just dread, it's weird. There's a single shot of a terrified eyeball, a hungover nun dealing with symptoms and guilt. Let's show her with a perfectly arranged, tentacled hairstyle in the morning. It's not natural, and that's exactly why it works. Experimentation begets horror, and director Arkasha Stevenson and the rest of the team did great work trying to draw out this unsettling vibe in creative ways. The atmosphere is the standout, from the cinematography to the original score. But let's not forget Nell Tiger-Free's fantastic performance, as she is able to convey fragility, terror, and frenzy with so much conviction. The dialogue is well written enough to earn our sympathy for certain characters and hatred for others. The opening death is a glittery splendor, and the climax feels truly epic given its length and emotion.
Please, please, please.
This is a great film and even a greater surprise. And look, I'm not saying you must love the film, but it did frustrate me a little that people were calling it a total failure because of the lore. If we insisted upon ourselves to never, ever, ever deviate from lore in any way, the character Niles from Frasier wouldn't exist. So you're saying you want to murder Niles? I will talk about the importance of lore and consistency with the other movie, but making it an end-all be-all is how we end up with the fucking Star Wars prequels. It's fair criticism, but don't just throw it away. And speaking of, I do have some criticism for this movie. No, the changes in the lore I don't consider to be automatic deal breakers, but I do think its status as a prequel is my only problem with it. When it has to tie back to The Omen, it quickly becomes less inventive and less spooky. Locking people in a room for exposition, the not great looking CG fire to call back to a scene from the original, and of course there's the final line, which may as well have someone wink to the camera. Out of a number rating, The First Omen is the best film I'm talking about today. But as a prequel, it didn't succeed quite as much as a little film called
Terrible, awful, murderous things. I regret them now, but I liked how they felt. I wish I didn't, but I did. At first, it was only animals smaller than myself. Nothing with feelings, nothing that could hurt me back. Felt good. Killing's easier than you'd think.
Pearl. Specifically as a horror prequel, Pearl is the best I've seen because rather than getting mired in iconography and connecting dots, it uses the first film, X, as a diving board. It isn't interested in recreating X, rather it is a character study, centering on how a sweet-natured farm girl turns into the elderly psycho that we see later in the timeline. This arc isn't something that happens overnight. The story establishes her current lifestyle and the anchors, as she sees them, holding her back. The more she gets a glimpse of a different future, the more resentful she becomes. She is fascinated by violence, and her sexuality comes out in almost violent ways because she doesn't know how to express arousal. My main point is that she already has this dark streak to her that is exacerbated by repression, but when the slimmest opportunity for a better life presents itself, she latches on like a tick. She covets that fantasy so passionately that no other option exists.
Rumor has it they may only be taking one gal per town.
It has to be me.
This arc demands a lot from the actress, and Mia Goth delivered from first frame to the last. This is a ferocious, undeterred performance. What makes this arc function so well isn't just that Goth screams bloody murder, but that she screams and cries and pines and hopes with such sadness and longing. There is a specific kind of anger or grief that comes from the unfair. You can hear it in their voice, and Goth made me believe that Pearl was not simply upset, but that she felt the world was turning against her. Horror is emotional, and both the script and the actress reminds us of that.
I just...
Tell me the truth! Why are you leaving me? What did you say? Why did you change?
You're scaring me, Pearl. Okay? I wish you the best luck with your audition. Sincerely.
Prequels tend to focus too much on making sure the plot neatly lines up, or over-explaining needless details like Wolverine's stupid jacket. So I applaud Pearl for both being character-based and also so stylistically different from X. I've been talking about this great character arc, but what struck me was how it adds a potent layer of tragedy to the other film. All Pearl wanted was to leave this farm and be a star. Supporting her husband and wishing his safe return from war was really a second priority. Spoiler, but her dreams are dashed by the finale of the movie, but it's still pretty open-ended. Many things can happen in the next several decades. So watching X again makes us realize that she never left. While her parents, who were big sources of frustration for her, are gone, she still had to take care of this farm. She still had to walk by the river, where she disposed of the body of a man that represented both her lust and hopes of escape. Partway through the film, she sees Maxine filming a sex scene, a young woman who obviously looks much like her since it's the same actress. Now, with the context of this prequel, Pearl isn't just jealous of this girl's sex life, but is harshly reminded of her own youth and happiness now gone. Now, this doesn't change Pearl from being a villain. It's not just tragedy that is added to X, but something sick as well. The way Pearl brutally murders a man after rejecting her advances calls back to the man from the prequel, almost as if it's her way of killing him twice. When she pushes someone into the lake with an alligator, she wanted to do that to her own father. So this will do. I do have a few issues with the film, most notably how repetitive it gets in the second act. It is nevertheless a beacon for other horror prequels. Rather than getting cluttered with the unimportant, the story takes a character we regarded as a lonely psycho and takes us on a journey of repression, fantasy, and mental collapse. And then, in turn, it makes the story that it's preceding fuller and better. People always say, don't fix what's not broken, and many times I would agree. But sometimes I think we can do better than just not broken. I don't think X or The Omen are perfect or untouchable. So if you're going to make a prequel, go in a new, stylish direction like The First Omen. Or try to add depth to the franchise like Pearl. We are surrounded by franchises that produce content to retain the rights, to hit benchmarks, to meet expectations. That's not art to me, that's a factory. And that's why Pearl and The First Omen make me happy for the horror genre as a whole. Perhaps if both movies prove popular in the long run, that could encourage other prequel makers to go about things with a bit more care. One can only hope. So, those are my two favorite horror prequels. Any others you'd like to shout out? I've got videos on the best horror sequel and remake coming soon, so stay tuned for those. Check out my playlist for other fun content, links to my Patreon and Discord are in the video description, and share and subscribe if you want to support the channel. As always, thanks for watching.